3, 2, and 1. All right, welcome everybody to the Ruda Rocketcast. Today we're going to have a great guest for you. He is an entrepreneur in the fitness space, and he is a very savvy investor at the same time. His name is Will Hurst. He is responsible for helping over 400 gyms become profitable. He's built their sales up. He's also built up numerous businesses from the ground up on his own. He started in the sales industry, and he has just worked his way until he is the position he's in now, running big little gyms. So, Will, thank you for joining us. I touched on a little bit there. You want to maybe tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Nick. I'm super excited to be a part of this, and very grateful that I'm grateful and honored for you to have me on, man. I know we work together, and working with somebody, I never expect for them to reach back and they don't owe me anything, you know what I mean? So for you to get me on and allow me to tell my story and do this whole thing with you is awesome, and I'm honored. So thank you so much for having me on, man.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's what it's all about. You've already provided me some value, so the least I could do is have you on here because I think there's a lot of good things that even just the time we've spent in a few months working together, I know that people are going to have a lot of takeaways.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Super excited to share whatever I can and give whatever value I can to your audience, man. Yeah, so my background, man, it goes way back. I think I'm probably, one of those chosen few, like, born entrepreneurs. I think everybody wants to be an entrepreneur this day and age. I think it's kind of like a cool thing to do, whereas like 20 years ago, like being an entrepreneur was like code word for like I'm broke and figuring it out. you know,
Yeah.
it's like now everybody wants to be an entrepreneur and like so but like back then, before it was cool, it was already like something I wanted to do. It was generally pretty like unemployable, and always found myself, if I did have a job back before I got into going into my own businesses, it was always in the realm of like sales and like being able to market myself well, and then help other people do their thing really, really well. So it started from that and went into I guess, should I go right into the whole story, or do you want to set this up a certain way?
Yeah, no, I mean, so you got into sales, like what you graduated high school and you're like right to sales, or how did that really go? What was your progressions there?
Yeah. So school, grade school, high school, like a lot of like your really brilliant entrepreneurs, you hear these stories, and like I can relate to a lot of them where like they didn't really enjoy like common school, right? Like, and so I couldn't wait to get out of it quick enough, right? Like, so, and I didn't come from a family that like went to college. Like nobody, we were very blue collar, and like nobody went to college. So there wasn't like this person telling me, "Oh, just get through high school. College is going to be great," right? Because like now that I have friends that went to college, like it sounds like it probably was pretty cool, and it probably would have been cool for someone like me because
Yeah.
it's a different experience than high school, middle school, and grade school, right? But I had no clue, and for me, I was like, you probably couldn't have convinced me anyways. I was like, this is a mess. I'm not interested in being involved in this. Like this, the way it all works, and I've always kind of been like a rebel. So even though like looking back, I probably was more liked than I believe.
Hmm.
I kind of looked at it like I was kind of like anti everybody. At the time growing up, there's always that angst, and so I'm the only one out of like all my brothers and sisters that actually have graduated high school, believe it or not.
Wow.
But they all have GEDs, or they all kind of the same thing. Like none, like just in our household, it wasn't an easy life growing up, and so naturally, like we all had to find our own path, and because we didn't necessarily have that structure at home, it made it tough to function and kind of like
Well,
the way the world works.
and I think a lot of people get started that way is because like sales is one of those things. There's a really low barrier to entry for a job that can produce a lot of money.
Yeah.
And usually for those jobs, it's a really equal balance of like higher entry, higher yield, higher entry, higher yield. And sales isn't that way. It's what you put in is what you get out in a lot of cases. Is that something you found?
100%, man. Yeah, the sales world is someplace I've always thrived because it was like take care of the customer, take care of my employer, right? Like be the person in between that's trying to build value in my employers, you know, tasking me to sell, and then also make sure the person on the other end has a great experience and finds value in it, and not so much try to sell anything at anybody. Actually, it's funny is, so you know, the last job I guess you could say I had was when I moved west. I moved west with nothing, And I'll just tell a little bit about this story real quick of how I even got this job. So I moved
Yeah.
west with nothing. I had like $1,000 to my name. Moved out here because I had some buddies that moved out to Arizona State University, and like again, I wasn't going to college, but they were living here off campus, and they kept like telling me about all the pretty girls out here, and they're like, "Hey man, you should come out. Like we'll have a blast. You can sleep on the couch." I'm like, "I got $1,000." I'm like, "It's okay. Come sleep on our couch." And I'm 20, and I'm like, "Yeah, okay, let's go do it." Right? Like let's just just being a 20-year-old young guy. I'm like, "Yeah, it sounds fun." So I moved out there, lived off that money for like a couple months, and we partied and he had like the beer can wall in our in the corner of our apartment and all this stuff, and it was just like it was growing old real quick though, and I was like, okay, I'm someone who likes to work, I enjoy work, and so I'm like, I need to do something, right? And so
Right. Something to fill the time.
yeah, so I literally like put on my like interview outfit one day, and like as I'm walking out the front door, there's like a newspaper laying there on the floor with the classified ads section on the back turned up, and like that's back then, and this is 2005. Like so, this is like Craigslist is barely a thing, right? So people still looked for jobs in the classified ads, and so I picked that up, and it was like Buick Pontiac GMC dealership. Now hiring salesmen, new ownership. And I'm like, okay, let's go check that one out first, right? So we go check that one out, and I walk in, and the best outfit I had at the time was like jeans with holes in it. And this is like 2005, so jeans with holes in it are not cool then. They're cool now, but 2005 jeans with holes with it were like the sales manager literally walked up and he was like, "You know how to dress for a job interview, bro?" And I was like, "Not really." He's like, "Okay, well let's do it anyways." And he's like, "Okay," and we get to talking. I actually really like you. I think you're going to do great, is what he tells me. And I'm like, and the only reason why I walked into the dealership to sell cars is because my jobs growing up outside Detroit were focused around building cars and working on cars because I grew up in Detroit, and
Yep.
that's like what people do there. It's the Motor City, right? So like, I'm like, I built cars, worked on cars, I understand cars. I can sell them probably, right? And
Why
so
not?
I go, yeah. So I go there, and I get, the guy gives me the job. It's in the car dealership world, they'll hire anyway. It doesn't matter if you can interview well or not. Like they'll just throw you out there and be like, if you sell some stuff, awesome. If not, you'll get eaten alive, right? Turned out I
Yeah.
was pretty good at it. I was, within 2 years, won an award from General Motors for like being one of the top three ranked salesmen in all of the Western United States. And then
Wow.
won like, Salesman of the Year and Salesman of the Month for that dealership like year over year. And we were like in the top 10 ranked dealerships globally for this brand. So like this wasn't like some small hole in the wall. I wasn't a big fish in a small pond. I was in a very big pond of people. So
Right.
and I never ever tried to sell anybody. All the stuff you hear about like car salesmen taking advantage of people. I can't recall
Yeah,
ever.
I think that's like one thing. So actually,
Yeah.
without getting too deep into it, my father's a car salesman and has
Oh,
been my
awesome.
whole life. He owned his own car lot, and that's what got me into entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Um, how do you feel like that you like took away the stigma of like a salesy car salesman or being that guy?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of my favorite things I've ever heard about sales is like people don't really like to be sold, but they love to buy, right? Like
Okay.
they really people love to buy. That's like what our country runs on is consumerism,
Mm,
right? Like people love to buy stuff, obviously, right? But they hate being sold, right? Every time they get sold something, they talk about it badly to their friends and how someone took advantage of them and all this stuff. So I always took the stance that like if I could create an environment, an experience that makes someone feel like buying, they're going to have a good time. They're probably going to pay more, and they're probably going to come back for more, right? And so that's pretty much like how I built that book of business when I worked for that dealership. Because I would say car sales is probably the closest thing that you could do. It pretty much should be a self-employed position, but you do technically work for the dealership. But I mean, it's sink or swim, just like starting your own business, because the dealership doesn't care if you sell 1 or 10. Someone's going to get those sales, and the cream always rises to the top in that line of work. So they don't, it's just the same. Um, so yeah, that was kind of always my feel, and so it was always, if a lady came onto the lot and she's showing up to buy a Buick, and I'm like, I'm gonna treat her like my grandma. We're gonna have she's gonna get out of her car, and she's gonna grab my arm, and we're gonna go for a walk down the lot, and we're gonna have a really good time looking at cars today, right? And at
yeah.
the end of that, finding the right car for her, and asking her what her current situation is with her car and what her desired situation is with her new car, and what's missing that would help fulfill that. We'd get her on the right car, right? And obviously along that fact finding journey, find out like kind of a roughly idea what her budget is, so we don't price her out, And then when we sit down to work the deal out, be fair and transparent all the way around. Like she understands we need to make a profit. Everybody does. So I don't see why
Of
some
course.
salesmen really need to try to disguise that or play a game of trickery. It's like, no, it's like, this is a partnership in making this deal. And what's funny is I actually made more profit than all the other salesmen. And we had some, every dealership has them. We had some sleazy guys that did some stuff. Right. And
Yeah.
it's funny, I actually made more profit than them per deal. And you never saw me up after a sale, like fist pumping my sales manager. For me, it was like, this is just what we do. We take care of people, right? And so
Yeah.
we always have
Yeah.
good,
And you're creating an experience for the customer too. Like,
yeah,
from the way it sounds,
yeah,
like hopefully making it less painful. Like, because most people, they find major transactions, buying a car, looking
hmm
for a home, whatever it is, like it's very painful experiences.
yeah.
Most
It
people
can
dread it.
be. I can be. I think that's why when they find someone who's different and the experience is good, they quickly they don't feel pain at all, right? Because people love to buy things, right? Like Apple is the largest market capital company on of any public company, right? Like in history to date, and they don't when you walk in there, the salesmen don't try to sell you things, right?
No, you walk in there and you already know you're buying, first of
Right.
all.
And that's because they created an environment that makes you feel like buying from like the culture of their brand and their branding and their message and like the experience when you walk into the store and even the other patrons and how they've kind of guided people to be perceived this way as an Apple user. That whole thing is part of an environment that makes people feel like buying. And I think any salesman or small business owner can do the same thing in how they make people feel the same way, right? Yeah.
Right. So from there, you start getting into entrepreneurship. That started with you started a landscaping business, right?
Yeah, yeah. So the only thing I ever took seriously in high school in regards to schooling was like they had a vocational school you could go to for like your junior and senior year. A lot of schools have this, where if like you're going to pursue a career or vocation, you can go to like that technical school and learn this thing. And they said, "Look, hey, so I grew up wanting to design golf courses. I grew up pretty good at golf and like playing golf, and that's like, the only place I ever really learned any etiquette was like at the golf course, and it's probably like what raised me actually because home life was kind of crazy. So my mom would just dump me off at the golf course, and I'd spend all day there. And like, so I fell in love with that, and I would draw like sketches on grid paper of golf courses, and like I was like a golf course architect by like age 9, right? And so I wanted to do that, and then so high school comes along and I'm like, I have no concept of what's possible because no one really told me. But I'm thinking like, oh, maybe I can go to this like vocational school and get my foot in the door and become like a landscape architect and maybe a golf course architect. Little did I know that requires like practically like a PhD
Yeah,
level
right.
of engineering because it's not just like move some dirt around. It's like you're talking about entire environments, you know, being moved around, and like rehoming animals and stuff like that. It's not that easy. So, but anyways, I went and enjoyed it immensely. Learned all about horticulture and landscaping and drought tolerant landscapes and all this stuff. And I loved it because that's what I love to do is be outside growing up. So anyways, I go to that thing. And then, when I'm selling cars and going through that career path, like I meet a guy like about 2 years in, and selling cars, you take the job, you take the application, the credit application for every deal you do, and they write their information down. Sometimes you just do it with them. What's your income? What's your social security number? You write it all down, and you just have them sign it.
Right.
The guy came in to buy like a $120,000 like Yukon Denali, with like wheels and everything, right? Like
Yeah,
maxed out. And he comes in, his got a hot wife and cute kids, and like I'm like, man, this guy's living the dream. Like this is cool. And so like at the end, I'm like, he starts filling out his application, and he's like, oh, I run a landscape company, right? And I'm like, oh, that's cool. I start talking to the guy, and he's like, yeah, man. He's like our stories are very similar, and I'm like, and I kind of planted this seed that kind of grew into a tree, and then like a couple years later, 2008, 2009 hits, and that's like the recession, right?
yep,
And funny enough, like talking about like customer service and serving people well, kind of what kicked this thing off is like I bought a house in '07, had this little tiny sliver of a backyard at the time because it was kind of like a time like now where houses were really expensive relative to the time period, and had this little side yard. And I'm like, well, I can't plant grass back there. So I need something like drought tolerant that doesn't require a lot of work. I'm like, I'm going to do this artificial grass stuff that's just come out. Like there's the new version that looks like real grass that you see everywhere now. But at the time, it was
yeah,
just coming out. And it was a big deal. And here in Phoenix, it's a really big deal because grass. It's not that we are in a drought type area, but it also is just hard to grow grass here because like only certain varietals will grow in this climate. and I'm sure it's heck not going to do it in an area that doesn't get sun with this little sliver of a side yard. So I get this turf company to come out, put turf, and they charge me like $10 a square foot for it. And so it's like a couple $1,000 to do this little patch of grass. And I'm like, whatever, go ahead and do it. Right. They do it.
Yeah.
And then like I get this dog, and this dog rips up the turf, this little puppy dog. And I'm like, so I call him and I'm like, hey, can you guys come on and do a warranty repair on this? I'll pay you for your time. And like, they just ghosted me because it wasn't worth their time because they were too busy. It was kind of like, people don't realize it, but like 07, 08, 09 was kind of a time like now where like it was busy, and like right before the crash hit, like there was a lot of cash in the markets, and like it was hard to get someone to come out and do something, right?
Yeah.
And so like this guy just didn't come out, and I was like, well, that's terrible customer service. Like, let's see if I can fix this myself, right? I go to the trash can because it was just the week before, and I find the wrapper of the turf. It comes in a big wrapper like carpet does, and it's got the label of like the manufacturer on it. And I'm like, I'll just call the manufacturer. And so I call the
Yeah.
manufacturer, and they're like, yeah, I played dumb like I was an actual like installer, and I was like, I need to buy some turf, man. I got a job over
Right.
here.
Right.
And I'm like, how much you need? I'm like, I need like 10 square feet. And they're like, oh, dude, we don't do that small. Like, it comes in 15-foot wide rolls. You got to buy more than that. It's like a 10 linear foot minimum. You need to buy 150 square feet. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, how much is it? And they're like, $1.60 a square foot. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, I paid 10 for this. You know what I mean? Like,
Right. Right.
it's
Right.
math real quick. And I'm like, I'm like pretty quick with numbers. And I'm like, oh man, these guys have made a fat margin on me. And so I'm like, so I ordered the roll from them as like to patch the yard, and then it shows up, and like just to go through the experience of like, what does it take to get this stuff here, and like, can I go
You
do this?
start figuring out like, hey, sourcing it, what's the
Yeah,
margin, and you're
yeah,
starting to
exactly.
see those numbers like play out in
Yeah.
front of you.
And the reason why I told the story about landscaping is because it wasn't just like I just picked the money grab thing. It was like that lined up kind of with like something in my past that like I had a lot of interest in, right? That I had experience with landscaping. And this was a niche
Yes.
product. And I'm also, as I mentioned, kind of a disruptive personality type, kind of rebellious. So like also I liked that it was like different, unique, and it wasn't just like put some grass in your backyard. It was like this new age stuff, right? It's the artificial grass. And like uh so yeah, so I ordered some, and then I got it, put it in, watched some videos at the time. It might have been YouTube. I don't know how to like stake it in. And then I was like, that was pretty easy. And I'm like, okay, I'm like, let's put some, at the time, the dealership I worked for, they were starting to run like Google ads, and I'd seen some of them, how they were running. And they were, the guy who ran the marketing told me, he's like, man, we can get leads in here for like 5 cents a click. And I'm like, again, another little uh,
Light
seed.
bulb goes off. Yeah.
Yeah, little seed. I'm like, huh. I'm like, okay. I'm like, maybe I can try this, right? So I put some like Google ads up, and at the time it was like, like I said, this is '08, right? This is like the very beginning of like paid digital marketing that we know of now that is like widespread use. And so like I'm running Facebook Google ads in like 2008, before like it's probably 5 years before anybody we know who talks about digital marketing
Yeah.
now
Even got it.
doing them, right? And so I'm
Crazy.
running. Yeah, and like the leads just start pouring in. I built this like little website on like Yahoo Site Builder at the time, with like it's like literally looks like what people call a funnel now, with like a picture, pain, like agitate, solution, tired of your crappy natural grass lawn, all the water you got to waste, blah 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 blah. Buy this, try this, right? And like fill out your form for to book a consult for us to come out and look at your lawn, right?
View the property and
Do the
assess and
property and give you a quote and all that stuff, right? So like I go and buy like some invoices from like Staples, like a box of like carbon copy invoices, and like I go out and see like the first few jobs, and I make a sale on like the first one, and I made like a razor slim margin too. But I just wanted to sell and get a job, like a beta test. And the guy was kind of greasy. The guy, like, he knew he was working me down and shaking me down, and I think he could tell that I was just getting going. And I think I sold the job for like $3.50 a square foot. So I made like maybe $500 in the job or something like that. But I went out and did the job in like a day. Like grabbed a guy from like Home Depot and like put him. And I was like, "Hey man, can you move dirt?" And he's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Let's go move some dirt." And he's like, "Okay." And he jumps in my truck and we go. And then so we go. I pay him out for the day afterwards, and then after all my costs, I think I made $500, but I made that in a day, right? And at the time,
not
like
bad.
yeah, not bad at all, especially in like '07, '08, especially for someone where the most money I've ever made in a year at that point was maybe like 120K a year at the dealership. And if you break that down to per day, I don't think it's even that much, right? So I'm like, sweet, I would have to sell 2 cars to get commission to make that much money in a day, right? So I start scaling it up. I start running more ads, getting more leads, and then so like I at the time I got to cut my teeth really early in a time when no one else knew what this was, and like lead generation and client acquisition and numbers. And then as information started coming out about like looking at the numbers in Google and how to tweak them and the keyword searches, I started drilling down, and I had my cost per like client acquisition down to like 20 or $30, and we were doing jobs that were like tens of thousands of dollars. And so we scaled this business pretty quickly because we had a lot of profit, and you can't just keep it all. Otherwise you're going to pay a ton of taxes. So I'm like, I'll just reinvest. Right. And, I'll pay myself out as well, but I'll reinvest in the company. I'll just put it back into ads. We'll get a warehouse. We'll get a forklift truck in the warehouse. We'll start buying the product in bulk so we can get better prices, economy of scale. And we start doing all that. And like the business just starts cranking out cash. Right. And then at the same time, this is coming out of the recession. These manufacturing companies we are buying the product from, where it's made, they start like, they're like, hey man, like, we don't have anybody out West because they're all out of the East Coast. And they're like, we don't really have any wholesalers out West to like sell to other people out there that want to buy smaller amounts. Do you want to be like our exclusive wholesaler out here? And
Oh, wow.
I'm like, heck yeah. They're like, yeah, we'll just send you product on a line of credit. You sell it. And then after you sell it, you just pay us and keep the rest. And I'm like deal.
Sounds like a
You
good
know?
deal.
Yeah. This is in Arizona. I'm like, I've always wanted to move to California. Like growing up, because California, when you're growing up, looks like a blast. You're on the coast hanging out. And I'm like, I had the money to do it. So I'm like, I'm gonna move to California. And we were like spending so much money shipping product around as it was that like it actually saved us money to move to California because we were having to like bring a lot of product in through there and like other ancillary products that came through like through the ports there.
Hmm.
So like paying logistics fees to store product, like we can get our own warehouse and get like a house on the beach for less money than our logistics fees that we're paying over there. So like we set that up over there, and now we're multi-state, and then we're also doing like national wholesale, to that corner of the United States, and we cranked that business up to like 5 million a
Yeah.
year.
Well,
Like
holy
you're
crap. This was a pretty sizable business that you were running there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sitting where I'm sitting now, I mean, at the time it felt huge, but like technically 5 million is still kind of a small business in the grand scale of things,
Oh,
right? Like
yeah. I mean,
we had our
definitely
10,
in
yeah,
taxable eyes, it's a very small business.
yeah,
But
yeah.
um,
We had a couple install teams, a couple salesmen now running around. We had I built an e-com site again, like really early doing e-com stuff. And we even had an arrangement to where like if it was a sale on the other side of the states closer to my manufacturer, they would just drop ship it for me to the person that bought through me through my e-commerce site. So I would sometimes not even have to touch product to make profit, which is awesome. Yeah.
and like, how did you, I mean, because I feel like this is actually really practical because I feel
Mhm.
like, we're in a very similar circumstance right now.
Mhm.
What was it like being a newer business in the beginning of a recession?
Yeah. So me looking back, man, I mean, there are times when it was hard, but I mean, I've definitely dealt with much harder things since. You know what I mean? Like, um, it wasn't it wasn't that
You
tough. You
did,
know what I
you felt like there was still like a good amount of customer base out there, even though
mean?
the
Yeah. So here's
economy as a whole was kind of slowing.
Yeah. So what economies do? What a bad economy does, a reset does, is it doesn't affect new players coming in. It actually sets up really well for new players coming in. What it affects is your over leveraged like market shareholders, right? Like the companies and that's actually what happened, and why I was able to eat up market share is because coming out of like '05, '06, '07, all these companies were doing really, really well. And like people were like back then, people were like, and a lot of people got bit by this. And that's why you're seeing it again. And it's kind of alarming, but people were leveraging everything they had. They would buy it. They bought a house in '05 for 300,000. By '07, it was worth 500,000. So like, I got $200 equity. What do I do? Go to the bank and pull all that cash out. Right. And they would pull all that cash out, buy a bunch of
Right.
trucks, and then they would go and then they would also leverage all their equipment also and take loans out and personal loans on all their equipment. And so their companies were really bloated to where they had a lot of debt. And like two of the big competitors that were doing what I was doing, that were dominating the space before I moved in, pretty much went out of business, because like they just literally could not compete in the down economy with someone like myself who could afford to provide better prices and still make a margin, right? Like I was coming in like half the cost of them on jobs, and I was making more money than them. So like they just got priced out, right? So that's what you see happen in economy in a downturn is all your big bloated companies that bid off, that got too aggressive or too bullish on the market, they're going to get squeezed. That's going to create opportunity, right?
Right.
So you always want to be in a
Yeah.
position where you take advantage of that. Like right now, like with where the economy is going, really, really good time to have some cash, right? Like
Yeah,
it's funny.
absolutely.
People been talking about leverage and all this stuff the last couple of years, and it's like we're returning to a time here where like, sure, you may take a little bit of a hit on it with inflation, but like if if we some opportunities pop up here, you're going to be able to make some scores that are going to pay you back that amount, then some for years and years and years to come, right?
Right. Yeah.
So yeah.
Uh,
Anyways,
is as far as things go, kind of changing gears a little bit. Like right now, as it sits, like you're now so you moved on from landscaping business. You run a kind of a marketing consulting firm almost, um, and you're helping other business owners. Like you have a good bird's eye view of what's going on economically, I think, right? Because you're talking to a lot of different people in a lot of different areas, hearing how business is doing there. I mean, I think that's the best way to really find out how things are going, not just watching, CNN business and CNN NBC. You talking to people like that is getting the best idea. So, like, what is your current view of the market? Relating on that, what are your things that you think are going to be the biggest opportunities coming up?
yeah, yeah. So yeah, perspective. Yeah, perspective is everything, man. I think that's kind of what you're saying there. Is like perspective is everything in this situation. And I think rewinding back to that time, technically I'm a millennial, right? I'm 38. That's like right at the top of the millennial, what they call a
Yeah,
millennial.
between me and you, we have the two spreads of the millennial
Yeah.
here.
So it's interesting because I'm about as young as you could be and have actually partaken in that previous recession. I don't know anybody really younger than me, and I know very few people even as old as me, or even a couple years older. Most everybody that got hammered or took advantage of that last recession is usually like 5 or 6 to 10 years or more older than me, right?
Right.
So it's kind of like I feel like as far as millennials go, and like which is most everybody of the consensus class of consensus age now, like
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm too young. Like, I remember what my parents went through, but
yeah,
money didn't mean anything to me then. I wasn't paying bills,
right,
right? So
exactly, yeah,
you're like right at that cusp where you have that old
yeah.
experience, but you're still like new age enough to understand what's going
Yeah,
on.
100%. And it's given me this unique perspective, I feel, because as I talk to other people my age or younger, like they kind of look back and see people that made money from that last recession, and like they just think it's going to be like just the houses are just going to start growing on trees all of a sudden. They don't realize that, like how hard it was to actually buy back then, even when it was down, and what that looks like. So, as far as like what things look like going forward, there's it's really early to see how it plays out, right? There's a lot of variables, and like having conversations. I think,
Are you
this is
starting to hear from like, you work with a lot of entrepreneurs, like are you starting to hear from them like panic about the market, or are they more excited about, hey, I might have the opportunity to buy this building that I've been looking at, or
yeah, definitely some of that. A lot more of the positive, like opportunistic thought. Again, there's a little bit of naivety there because they haven't done it before, and realizing that like it's for a lot of reasons when things hit the bottom, it's not really that easy because like they stop giving out loans when things get really really bad. They stopped. It's not that easy. It's not as easy as just like, oh, I just can buy whatever I want, right? But anyways,
yeah,
it's mostly positive. I think at this point there's not enough pain in the markets yet. We're not there yet. There's not like blistering amounts of pain, right? And that's when you'll know, right? Right now it's still there's a little bit. You're seeing things pull back a little bit, but like no one's really truly freaking out. You see a few people complaining about gas and whatever. That's
yeah,
really like, is about as far as you're seeing. I think when you really know you're at bottom and you'll really see what everybody's going to do is going to be like when it's like executives start losing their jobs. That's probably really what we're looking at here. And again, this is like just and I do have a lot of conversations. This is something I heard recently that made a lot of sense to me, and it may or may not happen, but really the working class of people on the lowest rung of the totem pole, their wages are going to go up during this whole thing because they have to. They're everything else is inflated ginormously, but wages haven't gone up for like people below like 60K in like a decade, right? And I'm not like and I'm not saying like I'm one way or the other on this. I'm not making a stance. I'm just saying what it is, right? I'm just saying what it is. It
yeah.
hasn't.
It's the most lagging piece.
Right. And if you, and the only way it's one of the ways we get out of this inflation spiral is you have to raise the bottom up, right? Like, otherwise those people will just have less and less money as the little few dollars that they have get eaten up by inflation, right? As their buying power goes away, they're barely going to be able to afford rent, let alone feed themselves, let alone have discretionary income, right? And like that, those are the people, most of your people that spend a high percentage of their income on discretionary things are people like, below 100K pretty much, right?
Hmm.
So like in order to increase the GDP, we're going to have to pick that up, right? That, again, that's not like me making some sort of stance about wages or whatever. That's just is what it is. That's just economics, right? So like that's one of
Right.
those things. You're not going to see those people really get squeezed. Where you're going to see squeeze, who's made most of the money over the last 5, 6, 7 years. That people that work for other people are mostly executives, right? You're seeing these companies getting really bloated with a lot of like layers of executive. Like I have friends that have like jobs that like aren't that meaningful working for companies, but they're just so much cash they got to pay people. So they're like, let's pay this kid. He seems cool, and the guy making 150K a year, doing a job with him and five other guys that one guy could probably do, right? But it just makes
Right.
it easy for that company when the cash is flowing to have a
Well,
lot.
I mean, Coinbase just posted an article like last week, right? So it was big story on Wall Street and in the crypto industry is like they cut 18% of their workforce, and the CEO said like, "Oh, well, we miscalculated our hiring. We miscalculated how much money was going to be coming in, and
Yep,
over these next
yep,
few like months and years."
yep.
And they just brought these people on, and they're already like, "Oh, nope, sorry, wrong decision."
Yep. And that's what, and that's, those are probably all 6 figure plus year earners. It's a big tech company, right? So
And if
that's
you have a huge company that's growing and you can all of a sudden just cut 18% of your employees, like you probably didn't need the 18%. It was the extra fat, if you're
right.
like, oh yeah, those can go.
Yeah. And that fat that's going to get trimmed is going to be cutting out, those mid level executives that you hired because, big companies play this game where they bring, like you said, they blow it up and bring a bunch of talent in. And then they kind of, in attempt to find the winners out of that and eventually cut away the fat anyways. Right. And then they're left with a really talented, lean team. But like, people they can't time when to lean out, and right now a lot of companies are really bloated because there's been so much cash in the market. So naturally, and I'm not an expert on this stuff, so like people can take it for whatever they want.
Yeah, no,
But
this isn't
just
financial advice. We'll go
yes,
through that again as
yeah,
we
this is
always do.
yeah, it's not financial advice. It's not. It's just like perspective. It's not, and I'm not even claiming to be like I know this stuff for sure. This is just stuff in our conversation we're having about like who I've talked to, who said things that like click for me. I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? And then you also have like China owns something like has a hand in like 30% of our residential real estate because of the way that their tax laws work. I heard this from a really good friend who's deep in real estate the other day. We were just out having a cigar, and he's like, yeah, man. He's like, there's these big corporations like Evergrande over there that are huge holdings that have money not just in China but also in United States funds, and they're gonna go kaput here soon too, or at least pretty close, right? If that does happen, that can the collection of things can create some dynamics that aren't desirable for like the economy. That being said, like I'm actually pretty like despite all that, like I listen to that stuff, I hear all that stuff, but I'm actually like pretty bullish. I don't think it'll be as bad as people think, but maybe I just wishful thinking. I actually believe me, I would be licking my chops if the market were to cut in half right now because I've been like sitting here waiting patiently and not doing
Yeah,
what so many people have done and like taking all the we've made money over the last few years, we've done well, but we've mainly just held tight and just been okay with like just pay the taxes on that. We don't need to like try to be doing something with
right.
it all the time, right? And I've got some good investments, some real estate properties that are like cash flowing, so I don't need like you
Well,
know,
I mean, it's an important thing to do. Whether you're a trader, you're an investor, whatever your job is sometimes like you always want to have your money working for you, but there's also a time to like pause, right? It's almost like that rest and digest mindset of like, all right, let's
yeah,
look at things. Let you maybe you miss an opportunity or two. It's not
yeah,
like there's not going to be more coming down the road.
yeah,
I've absolutely had that sometimes in my investing, career is like you have a good one, and sometimes it's like you have a good one, and it's like like hit the brakes because
yeah.
sometimes you get your ego gets inflated. You start thinking you're seeing everything perfectly, or you're like, I can't miss this opportunity, and then all of a sudden, you'll get cut down a peg.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, and also like I think the market kind of started getting to like levels as like the 2 or 3 year mark where you're kind of like, this is nearing a peak here. This is getting pretty frothy here, especially when you hear the way people talking. You always can tell by the in general by the way people talk about things, like saying to the moon and all this stuff. Like we can listen to that and like you're like, oh, this is getting really frothy. Like, right?
Yeah, I
This,
think I want to say it's Warren Buffett has a saying. He's like, when my pizza delivery guy starts offering me any unsolicited financial advice, it's time to go cash heavy.
right, 100%. And we started seeing that like 2.5 to 3 years ago, as they started pumping a bunch of, right even before COVID. And then when that hit, pretty much, you know, they pumped a bunch of cash in the economy and it just went wild, right?
Well,
Because
when money's cheap, it's easy for people to make money. That's the
right,
bottom line, right? There's
right,
a lot of cheap money
yeah,
out there, and it's driving stocks up, and you don't even really need to know how to invest to make money in crypto or stocks. You just throw it in, and you were going to make money over the past 2.5 years. It was pretty simple.
yeah, yeah. So it was like I pretty much used the last couple of years as people were still buying and making a big noise to kind of start getting out of some of the stuff that were like equitable positions. My real estate stuff I've just held because it cash flows, and I don't really care if it dips because my original intent with that stuff was long. And then just been waiting for like the market to kind of return to at least what would be considered even normal, right? Like even normal would be good, right? But like if there's a really good buying opportunity, which is gonna if there is, it's gonna come with a lot of pain, right? There's gonna be
Yeah,
a lot of people when your buddy down the street that you always talk to who's got a good job is out on his butt. That's when it's we're in it. You know what I mean?
right.
Anything that somebody sells on the internet about just that looks like they're foreshadowing is really just people talking because that's not really paying, right?
Yeah, this market has seen some pain. I think for me, my perspective is obviously a little bit different because like I've been paying attention to. I pay attention to stocks to like use it as information to help me make decisions in the crypto markets. But I'm really I've been all out on the equities markets for some time now, mostly because I think when the whole GameStop thing happened, I just kind of had this light went off that was like the market is not working for most people right now.
Sure.
Just it made me take a step back.
Yeah.
But I look at it and there's been a lot of pain in the crypto market. You know what I mean?
Oh
Like,
yeah, crypto for sure. What's the most volatile, right? So it's going to rise the quickest and fall the fastest, right? And it's a pretty good
yes,
indicator of what things are coming, right? Because people are going to pull out of those volatile positions first, right? The last
right,
thing to go will be real
exactly,
estate because it's way more stable than stocks, and then stocks are more stable than crypto, right?
right.
The swings aren't as big. A 20% loss with a stock is about as bloody as it gets. 20% with crypto is like a normal day.
Yeah, it does. It happens all the time. Exactly. You got
Yeah.
to have a stomach for it.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, crypto. Same with crypto too. I did the same thing. When I say equitable positions, I meant crypto and I meant like stocks. Like I
Sure.
went.
Yeah.
I bought pretty heavy when the whole flu thing hit. I'll say that just to avoid. I don't know where you might be posting this
Oh
thing.
yeah. Yeah. We'll get
Using the,
that.
the dirty c word sometimes is not a good thing for the algorithm. So yeah, when that whole flu thing hit, and things dropped 30% in like a couple days, I was like, here's an opportunity, right? So I bought pretty heavy, threw a bunch of cash in the market, and then watched it like triple over the next like year and a half, and then it kind of slowly just sold off those positions. Pretty well nailed it too. But the thing was, and probably a principle of mine that's done well for me that I would say that everybody should have, which I feel like is common sense, and you'll hear every good investor say it too, is like you pick your exit and exit point. You pick your exit points when you buy, right? Like, and you stick to
Yes.
that, right? No matter what, you don't let emotion sway you. And I did that. I bought in March 2020, and in February of 2022, I started exiting positions. And sure enough, look what happened. Like literally in March of 2022, they started jacking up rates. And that's when the market pretty much started falling off, right? It started to dip a little bit as of the new year, but it's okay to sell off a little bit late. What you don't want to do is sell at the bottom, right? Like that's,
Yeah.
buying is almost the easy part. Selling is the hard part, right? People will hold on to stuff because it's done so well for them. They'll get sentimental about it. And I was like, nope, this was when I picked. We're going to start exiting positions. And what's interesting too, is I sold off pretty much all my positions that had to do with I bought mostly EFTs on the stock side, and then with crypto I bought the big, pretty much an array of everything, and
Yep.
I like to diversify. With stocks, EFTs are great because it's kind of a collection of a sector, and the only sector I didn't sell out because I had a hunch it was going to keep going wild was energy, and so it turned out to be a pretty good pick, and I've held my energy position pretty much bought like a Vanguard ETF, energy ETF, and that contained all
Yep.
the oil stocks, which have just been going wild since they jacked up prices, right?
Yeah. So like people haven't even seen with all this is that gas is going up. But part of the reasons we're seeing gas prices what they are is like these companies are just taking advantage of the current opportunity in the market, right?
Oh yeah,
So they know that they can charge more for what they're doing, and there's not going to be any backlash because they have all these headlines and stuff to reinforce what they're doing.
yeah. Well, in the past too, with with past administrations, generally, if gas got out of control, they would start to subsidize, and they would start to give tax breaks, and they would start to give concessions to the oil companies to say, hey, you can make your money, but we're gonna fund that. Don't take it out on the public, right? Right now, the current administration's pretty set on like their green energy policies. So, and again, I don't like to get into that stuff, and I don't have an opinion on that stuff. But their plan has been to give no concessions to any energy companies that have to do with fuel and gas. So, and they've pretty much removed all regulation. So they're pretty much saying, go ahead and jack up the prices as high as you want. We're going to let the public feel the pain. So we move towards green, clean energy, which say what you want about the bills and how they're doing it. There's a lot of subjectivity with that, all that stuff, and I have opinions on that too. But we have a Tesla, and it's freaking awesome. Like we don't, I don't think the idea of moving to like electric cars is a bad idea, right? Now, obviously, with these deals, it's not necessarily just about that. There's also these politicians love to get their hands on a lot of other things too, and there's a lot to do with that. That's probably I'm not so much a fan of, but it's like I feel really, really good about my Tesla right now, right? So, and
Right.
it's probably not a bad thing if we move to electric cars. It's great, right? It's more efficient and all that stuff. So, and by saying that, I'm not endorsing the way that this is all being done. I'm just saying like that part of it, that
There's
principle
an upside to all of it,
makes sense. It just makes sense, right? Because like we can't probably shouldn't be burning gas forever when we have like great technology out there, that you can pretty much build a better car electric now than you can gas, right? And I have both, you know.
Right, right. Now, at what point did you kind of switch into like an investor in that point? Like, you said you bought some crypto and stuff. You had some ETFs. Was that always a like ambition of yours, or was there like a year or a time where you're like, all right, you know what, now it's time for me to start expanding my portfolio, start building my portfolio?
Yeah, yeah. So if we rewind back, there's a gap in between this more recent last couple of years part we're talking about and back kind of where we left off with the landscaping company. If we go back to like 2011, 2012, I grew that company like $5 million a year, and it sounds great and fancy and all, but like I had no idea what I was doing from like a business operational standpoint. And I was running into the thing into the ground. Like I was just a all I thought that business was sell, 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 and I was hiring too late, and also wasn't doing things right from a standpoint of like my bookkeeping, and just didn't really have any idea of what I was doing other than like I just knew how to sell well and market well. And so like I was starting to really like burn out on that company, and just decided to like move on and do other things. Right. So 2011, 2012, I'm in California. Actually 2010, I moved to California because that's when we expanded the to the wholesale thing. When I'm there, I find CrossFit, right? So I find CrossFit because I want to work out and start getting in shape. I go to this CrossFit gym. It's awesome. And we're having a great time. It's like a party and everybody's working out and we got in great shape and all this stuff. And then while I'm doing that, I'm publishing on social media because I'm doing CrossFit and what do CrossFitters do when they start? They tell everybody, right? So I start post on social media. Look at me doing
This is
CrossFit,
true.
right? And my buddy Eric, who I grew up with, reaches out to me. He's like, "Hey man, I've been coaching CrossFit for a couple of years. This is amazing." He's like, "I see you're crushing it in business." He's like, "I want to move out west. I've always wanted to come check out the coast too." He's like, "Do you want to?" I say, I have my L1. I love this stuff." He's like, "If you want to be an investor, we can open up a space, and we can open up a gym." And what was interesting, these things keep happening. Have happened in my life multiple times, where things just kind of come together. Is like we were bringing in a lot of product from China at the time on these container ships, and a container ship
Yeah.
is 40 feet long, right? So it's 40 feet long, and if you can imagine 40-foot long container ship and rolls of artificial grass, they are 15 feet long, and they're big rolls, and so you
Yep.
push them in the
Kind of
back of
like,
the
yeah, like carpet.
yeah. So you push them into the back of the container ship, and now you're 15 feet deep. You put another row in, and you're 30 feet deep, and then you have 10 more feet left in the container ship. And I was paying for like 20 container ships a month worth of product to come over here, and I'm like, what else can we bring over here? And at the time, like goods from China were super cheap. This is before China's always been obviously a provider, a supplier to the United States, and a manufacturer, and their whole industry is built around our consumerism. But it really cranked up in the last decade. At that time, it was still like there was no competition and the goods were super cheap. So I was like, because I was into the CrossFit thing, I was like, oh, maybe I could start. I saw like Rogue Fitness, who provides CrossFit gyms. They were charging like a fortune for barbells and all rigs. And I
Right.
found a company that built the same stuff in China at the time. I didn't know that China stuff wasn't good, but I'm like, let's just, I'm like, I got an extra $1,000. Let's bring over a bunch of barbells and try to sell them and make a profit. I bought all this stuff and throw it into the container because I had free shipping pretty much because I was already paying for this container ship. brought it all over. It sat in the corner of my warehouse because I never got around to actually putting it up on like, because I was doing e-commerce.
Posting it anywhere.
And I never put it up. I never built my e-com site around it. So it just kind of sat there. And I had like everything you needed to start a gym. I had GHDs, I had rigs, I had
That's
barbells.
hilarious. So
I
it
had,
was just all ready to go for him
it
when
was
he
ready
gave
to
you this
go.
call.
Yeah, it was all ready to go. And then he reaches out and I'm like, what am I going to do with this stuff? And like, I already had, and I was like, yeah, actually, I wouldn't mind being the investor. He's like, I'm like, if you run it, I'll be silent and we'll do this thing. Right. Because I got all the gear and I even had extra warehouse space. So we even had someone come in and put up like walls and like partition off a corner of this 20,000 square foot warehouse I had. And we had like a 4,000 square foot CrossFit gym, like partitioned off in the corner of this warehouse at the time. And it was, we started this gym. And so that was kind of like me starting to diversify into other businesses. Naturally, like I didn't stay silent. I wanted to coach and be involved in the community and grow the thing and all this
Yeah.
stuff. Plus, he wasn't a sales guy; he was a coach and all this stuff. And like I was more the sales marketing end of things. So we grew that gym to like 200 members, and then we did that for like 4 years. Like I said, we decided to get out of that landscaping company, so we sold off parts of it and liquidated what was left of it. Had a bunch of cash. While I was in California, one of the things I did on that investor tip was like this is 2011. I bought a house right there on the coast, like for like a third of what it was previously worth, because it was 2011, 2010,
Right.
and so we bought a little home and like right on the within walking distance of the waves. It was like 600,000. I'm like, this kind of price to live right here on this real estate is ridiculous. I'm like, I'm buying, right? So I buy. I buy. I had to pay like 20, huge, like $1,000 a month in mortgage insurance, like, and the payment kind of scared me, even though like I could afford it at the time because we were doing well. I just never spent that kind of money per month on anything in my life. My mortgage payment was like $5,000 a month or something like that, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And even though I could afford it, like at the time, it's just something I wasn't adjusted to and like couldn't handle. So like I was just really struggling between like letting that one business go and being overwhelmed by it, and then now having this enormous
Taking on
payment.
this new big
Yeah,
debt. Yeah.
yeah, and so like I kept the house for like a year or two. We made the house, it went up between like 2011 and 2014 to like back up to like $1 million, because it was just so depressed. So I was like, I could sell this property, I can sell this gym to my partner at the time. He kind of figured, I kind of finally got him up on the tip of how to sell and market. And I was like, I sell this house, this gym, and I can move back to Phoenix with some cash. And that's pretty much what I did. I moved back to Phoenix in 2014, bought two condos here. Something I left out is I still owned a home here from prior. I bought a home back in 2007, right prior to the previous recession. I still owned that. And so I
Right.
had three properties here, and I could live in one, rent the other two, cash flow, and pay my mortgage payment off the cash flow of the other two, while I started a new gym here. And now that I had cash, I didn't have to make any concessions. I could start like a really kick-ass gym.
Right.
So I did. I started the second gym in 2014, and we grew that gym to like a 400 member gym. And it was cash flowing pretty hard for several years. And then, but along the way, man, I was always like, I would, in all my businesses, I would put myself on payroll, pay myself on W-2, set up a 401k, and like a Roth IRA, and just always be like buying and investing, right? And then like any deals that came along with real estate, like when I moved back to Phoenix after I upfitted that gym and bought those couple of properties, I was down to like my last like 30K. Like I didn't have much left, and I was like, I can buy one more property. I have enough down payment, and I didn't do it. And I'm like, instead, I'm going to take this last like 30K I have and use it as rainy day money, and I'm going to invest a little bit in like my skills as an entrepreneur. And that's when I
Yeah.
started. That's when I started like investing in like mentorship and programs and like learning systems and learning how to be a good business owner, and like to not do the things that I did with that first business where like I didn't operationally set it up well because I didn't know what I was doing. And we built the second gym around that learning curve, and then that eventually we were pretty good at it. We were pretty good at like running and operating and scaling businesses. But my appetite having been set, my standard for success having been set so high from a younger age with that first business, naturally like it's hard to come off of that. And with the gym, I was like, okay, like we're kind of maxed out here. We have 350 members, which for a CrossFit gym is freaking huge. It's, we had, three different rooms running classes to kind of keep it so it was still not like overbearing on the people in the program. I mean, our gym was popping, people loved it, but
Yeah.
we didn't want to turn it into like a mess, right? We wanted good quality
Well, yeah, you
experience.
hit that point where there's too much flow, and then you start to lose quality, and then before you know it, people are talking about how like, oh yeah, Will's gym kind of sucks now.
Right, exactly. And luckily, we never had that, but we just began to start scaling horizontal. You start scaling sideways, right? Like in order to like keep up with that kind of size, now you're running multiple programs, you have more payroll, and like yeah,
Yeah,
you have more
bigger expenses.
yeah bigger expenses. So now you're scaling sideways, and you're really not making more money. But meanwhile, I'm this guy that's got this like urge to want to go, and so that's where like that's what pretty much got me to what I do now is with that second gym when I started in like 2014, like social media was kind of like becoming big, and like there were these Facebook groups with all these gym owners in it, and so like I just started sharing the journey of like my gym. There were like guys trying to be like gym owner gurus, guys. I wasn't trying to do that. I was just trying to like just. I had no intention of ever like trying to sell anything that would help gym owners one day, like I do now. At the time, it
Yeah,
was just like I just like it just seemed cool to like share your wins, right? So I would just share my wins and like hey guys, let's check out our cool desk we just built in the front area, or check out here's how we do our sales process. And I would just share a lot of stuff that would help other gym owners. And after a while, a lot of gym owners started hacking through my stuff, and they would be like, hey man, who does your lead gen stuff? This is really good. Who does your ads? Who does your whatever? And I'd always be like, yeah, I do. And they were like, oh, can you do it for me? Like I really
yeah,
like your
yeah,
stuff. Can you do it for me? Can I like, can you, and I'm like, I don't know how to do that for other people. Like I pretty much took what I learned growing that first company and applied it to a gym, right? Good lead generation principles,
right.
and then good sales in the back end of that, good follow up, and like creating an environment to make people feel like they want to buy. All those things I shared earlier, I did with my gym. That's why we grew, and why we would have continued to grow had we continued to own it. So, anyways, I we hit that kind of like threshold where we couldn't go anywhere any further. But meanwhile, I'm sharing with everybody, and we start getting asked. And I started to kind of do like some freelance stuff for marketing. And I didn't like it though, because I would do like a website for a guy, and then he would like nitpick about the rounded corners in the website, and like I just didn't know how to set it up to where like, hey, trust the process. This is what we do. If you're working with us, we're putting a system in place. I didn't know how to do what I do now. Back then, I just like became subservient to the other gym owners who I was better than anyways at running a business, and they were just like they would like not pay me for like 6 months, like, and I didn't want to run that kind of business, so I backed out of that and then continued to invest in like how do I didn't think it would be with gyms actually. I wanted to start something around the world of like agency consulting, business
Hmm.
expertise, because um, like I don't know, information based businesses are really high margin. They're really, really good. I also like know what I'm doing, and people trust in that. And like, I'm not one of these guys. Like I've done it, right? I've done it at like a high level a couple different times, and like I'm not one of these guys that's like never done it, trying to tell you how you should do it, right? Like I've
Yeah.
done it. I've broken my back doing this. I went through the hardest time in my life. One thing I left out is like in that second gym in like 2016, 2017, man. Like I started to deal with like anxiety issues. Never, I always thought I was above that kind of stuff. Anybody would have told me I had that anxiety and they were feeling down, I would have been like, man up, right? Like, but
Yeah,
here
yeah,
I'm starting to have like intrusive thoughts about the darkest stuff, man. I couldn't control it. And like, I would have panic attacks. And I'm like, what is going on with me, man? Like, and I ended up like, I was in a really bad place, like, really, like, at the end of, that rope, you know what I mean? And like,
yeah.
and, so I got help to get out of that situation. Really started like investing in like I don't know myself and my earning potential and confidence with these things, and like
Mm.
growing as a person, because like the hero's journey isn't just an external journey. It's not just an end result. It's an internal journey. That's
Oh
why
yeah,
like
absolutely.
every Marvel movie, like Thor doesn't get to pick up the Thor hammer unless he becomes like the noble Thor, right?
Right.
Like, and like it's until he like is willing to sacrifice. It's like the Soul Stone, right? The Soul Stone and the Avengers. It's like you don't get the Soul Stone unless you can make a sacrifice, right? Like, and it's like that's like a metaphor for like until and so that
Well, yeah, it's
helped.
that internal transformation you have to go through to get to that next level a lot of times.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like I learned a lot about that stuff, and then like when I came back around to doing this, I started, talking to a few gym owners. A few gym owners like, yeah, like, and I said like, well, maybe I'll do a beta program using gym owners as like the beta for like this new thing that I'm going to do. And I put it out there. I had like a handful of gym owners say, yeah, I'd love to work with you and do this beta thing. We launched it. I think I had like maybe a dozen gym owners sign on. It was pretty inexpensive for in relation to what a lot of these types of things cost, and we helped like all these gyms start growing, like started doing it, and then like we started building on top of that. But meanwhile, while we're building on top of that, we started pivoting a little bit, because at first it was like, it was really trendy. Like 4 years ago was like more of like run paid ads and drive a bunch of traffic and all this stuff. And we would do some of that too. But then we realized while we were helping gyms do that, they were like, you know what, Will, like the paid ads are great, but like I've actually got a lot of organic traffic that we're not really converting into leads, and we don't really know how. I've got a website, I've got that, like what do I do with that? And I was like, oh, I'm like, that's actually like what I've been doing the last, you know, 13 years to that point, is like driving
Hmm.
good organic traffic and all this stuff, and getting more of your traffic that you get organically to convert. And we started doing that with these gyms. And this is a really long way of answering your question about like turning into an investor, but it's kind of all part of it, because along the way, like all my own businesses I look at as investments, right? Like on the tip of investing, like as long as you have the skills. And like one of the things talking about Warren Buffett earlier that I've heard him say recently, because he went to China, I think, recently, and he went to a school there, and they had him, and he was speaking, and he was sitting up there with Charlie Munger, and Asian girl stands up, or Chinese girl stands up, and she goes, with the markets where it's at and the economies of where they're at, it's really dangerous for an investor to get in. Yeah, sure, you can make more money, but it's pretty risky. And almost all markets, in a time like this, what's the best thing to do with cash if you have it? Because if we just hold it, it's just going to devalue with inflation. He's like, that's a really good point. He goes, in all markets, no matter the condition, up or down, he's like, the best thing you're ever going to invest in is your own skills and personal earning potential. Right. So, like,
I like that.
yeah. So like, and when I heard that, that was pretty recently too, like a year ago. That was something I already always kind of thought. I never put it so what's the word I'm looking for?
Eloquently.
Eloquently, yeah, eloquently. I never put that eloquently. Obviously, Warren Buffett obviously, got nearly a century of this being on this planet and ups and downs. So
Right.
he's waxes poetic very well. But I heard that and I was like, man, he just nailed that. I'm like, that's like one of my core principles, the core values, I would say, is investing in yourself, right? Because like all these things, markets, crypto, stocks, houses, whatever. If you don't really have a good perspective, and this kind of goes full circle with what you were saying earlier about perspective. If you don't really have a good perspective on and being able to see through the noise and like filter out the noise and determine signal from noise, like you're always just going to do what everybody else does, and you're going to ride the waves like everybody else does,
Yep.
and you're never really going to differentiate yourself from the rest of the market and always be subject to it, right? So like that for me has always been like my guiding star, right? It's like I'm not, just because Joe Schmo or even a good friend of mine says this is a good idea, I'm not just going to go do it. Like, and it probably helps that I am a little bit of a debater. That's actually like my Myers-Briggs personality type, is a debater. So I like
Yep.
to debate. So like, you almost like, even if like I agree with you, I'll just be like
Yeah.
devil's
Just play
advocate,
devil's advocate for the hell of it.
everything, right? So like, even if my good friend says here's a really good idea, and there's all this hoopla around it, I'll still question it and pull it apart, and and that probably doesn't make the highs so high for me, but it keeps me from a lot of the lows,
Yeah.
So, and I think that is like just having a good intuition and perspective on these things. Not to say it's been perfect, because I've definitely made mistakes, but I've seen people in the same position do a lot worse.
Well, I've talked about this before, but like I like to think of I I put a lot of things into like video game perspective. So like you look at a video game, right? And it's like if you just keep bringing these attributes up, like it gets easier to play the game, right? Like
Yep.
if you're doing like my superstar mode and NBA or so Madden, and it's like
Yep.
if you keep raising your speed and you keep raising your quarterback's IQ, and it's like the game gets easier. You have a 99 overall player. It doesn't matter who you're playing, you can tear apart the game. And I
Yeah.
kind of like to quantify, like what it is. Like if you're a better reader, now you're a better writer, and it's like now I'm more confident on sales calls, and it's like all of a sudden like you're building this. The game of life is getting easier for you because you're building these skills. So like I think it's incredibly it's playing the long game too though, right? Because there's ways you can skip that stuff and not do it and still be doing all right, but then you're capped. I like to think of people who are willing to always work on themselves. Like Warren Buffett is still working on himself at like 90 years old.
Yeah.
People who
Yeah.
are willing to always work on themselves, like there's no caps really on where you're gonna go.
Yeah. No, you're spot on. And I noticed that too. He's probably one of the guys I follow most closely. Why wouldn't you? The guy's, incredible investor. And
Well,
I
I
think
just respect him because he eats McDonald's all the time and he's still alive. Like,
it's Coca-Cola and McDonald's and sees candy. That's like his diet. And he's still loving it. He's still living it up. Him and
yeah,
Charlie Munger both those guys are incredibly like alive when you hear them talk and have,
Yeah.
they not like a lot of old guys lose their opinion and their swagger. Like these guys haven't, like they still got it,
Right.
and I love it. But, anybody who's been around that long and that consistent in the game, has obviously got a good set of principles. And whenever you hear Warren really talk and like, like that, him going to China and that girl asking him about that, about what to do, like it wasn't some cookie cutter, like, I buy this and this time and this and it wasn't some like very practical in the dirt response. It was a very like in the clouds, high level. These are my principles, and this is what you should do with. This is what you should always do all the time, right? Because I think like to your point about like a video game and those levels. If we're talking about like a real high level athlete, why they're the best is because they can make decisions in their mind to do certain things fractions of a second quicker, but 100 times a game, all the time, right? And that just
Right.
makes them that much. That makes them worlds better than the next guy, right? And that's because that's automatic. That's subconscious, right? That's not. They don't logically think to just be a little faster to the ball, right? Like they
Right.
just are, right? And because they're just getting after it, right? So when you elevate all your levels, like you naturally like can make better decisions quicker without thinking about it so hard because it's like really decision fatigue and like the stress of a big decision. If you're not sure what to do and you don't have good principles to hedge that against and a good perspective, like you're gonna probably make some bad ones, right? And then
Absolutely.
it's gonna consume mental energy, and now you're kind of like in a downward spiral. You're kind of screwed, right?
Well, yeah, that's exactly how a lot of people lose momentum.
Mhm.
Is something like that. Now, do you feel like I think this is a great opportunity to tie this in. Do you feel like you have a routine, and you said you when you took that leap when you had that anxiety kind of scare, and you worked on yourself, you got some help. Do you feel like your fitness too, like, is something that's always helped you through this as well? Like, do you prioritize that still to this day, or is it kind of something maybe you've lost touch with? What's up with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, shoot. I think it takes being fit mentally, spiritually, and physically, right? Like all three of those things are really, really important. Important part of the balance. I think it depends on the person, right? Warren Buffett obviously eats McDonald's and all that stuff, and so obviously his thresholds are different, and he could still function in the other two categories at a really high level. And who knows? Maybe he's doing a lot more. Maybe that's just what he puts out there, right? I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
he's an investor and sees candy and Coca Cola, so of course it makes sense for him to say, "I drink Coca Cola" when you're that big of an influencer, right? So, but yeah, I think it's super, super important. For me, it's just something I have to do. I'm definitely a person that struggles with being idle, really high drive, and like for me, it manifests in a lot of like it can manifest itself in a lot of like spiraling thoughts. So for me, like I would say how I got myself out of the rut I was in mentally a few years ago when I was trying to figure out this transition phase I was in to kind of try to become who I am now. There's a time there where I was just so down that like I just wasn't doing anything. I was just like just sitting around, and that wasn't me. It was out of character, and it was so hard to do it, and that's why like it's so easy to say, but for anybody who's been through it, it's very very hard to do to get moving again, right? To like get it
Hmm.
going again, to like really just take that first step and like try to put a positive face on and go do this thing that you maybe used to love or maybe never love, whatever. It doesn't matter. Just go do this thing that like is gonna get you moving. I'm a big fan of like what Tony Robbins calls like your state change, right? This is something I learned after this because he's one of the guys that I started tuning into when I was going through this. I started watching some Tony Robbins stuff. And he's talking about state change, and he's like, change your
Yeah.
body, change your physiology, change your mind, right? And like these other guys that get into this stuff, like Dr. Joe Dispenza. There's a bunch of guys that get into this stuff, and it's and like
Yeah.
they get into the actual science of it. That like your brain chemistry, your dopamine, your oxytocin, your serotonin, your endorphins, all these things are balanced by like, and everybody's need for this physical input is different, but like mine apparently is pretty high because if I don't move, like I start to struggle,
Oh
right?
man, I'm totally the same way.
Yeah,
Like, when there's a lack of movement in my life, I feel it start to build up, and it's like a grease that starts to like just like slow me down. And if it's been like 12 hours, I'm like, oh, here it comes. And then it's been a day, and I'm like, oh man, I got to get out there and get
yeah.
moving now.
Yeah. And so for me, and like working out, physical movement, work itself, like there's a time that like I try to chill out on work because like there's the hustle movement, and then there was the anti-hustle movement as everybody started making money. It's funny is like in 2012 is like people are coming out of the bottom. People are like, you got to get your hustle on, you got to grind, right? And then like come 2020, everybody's like, no, hustling's for losers. You got to like chill, right? Like, and it's easy to say when like the markets are inverted from that sentiment, right? Like it's so easy to say that because it's prolific. That's all it is, right? And it's like for me, like I like work, right? It's not a grind. I like to. There are days where like my wife's like, "What do you want to do today?" And I'm like, "I really like to work," But then there are days where I'm like, "No, I want to hang out with my kids. I want to go get dinner with you, right? I want to go be
Yeah.
out, right?" I just let it come to me, right? And rather than like try to be someone else's version of what like dispensing energy or what I do with my energy looks like, right? Because everybody has a different need in regards to that. Some people
Well,
probably
I've
do need to be lazy half the time, right?
yeah, I've heard it so much, and it's like it's been something that I always focused on from a young age. Like that's what brought me into entrepreneurship was like
Mhm.
I just heard the cliche of like, oh yeah, like make sure you find something what you're doing that you like what you're doing, or like your dad has a friend and he's like, oh yeah, he's really does really well for himself, but he hates his job. You know what I mean? And
Right.
it's like you start to see these examples, and then you're like, no, this is a real thing.
Yeah.
This is not something you want to end up doing. And so like I just kind of was like, hey, like I'm willing to risk being, not being able to do some of the things my friends can do, not being able to go on that trip in my younger years so that I can make sure that I'm in a position where I wake up and want to work when
Mhm.
I'm, in my when I'm in my 30s, and I can do those things that I want to do.
Yeah.
Um, and I hear people nowadays too that have great jobs and they're just like, yeah, this guy that I work with is better than me at my job though, because he's passionate and I hate my job, and it's like, and I just don't, in my head, it can't click to me how people do that. I'm like, dude, if I didn't like what I was doing, like I would have to move on to the next thing, like pretty fast,
Yeah.
because I lose it.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I'm the same. That's like why I never even gave college a try, right? It's like school wasn't working. I decided this is not for me. I'm moving on, right? Like with conviction, I'm going this direction, right? And I had this hunch when I was making that decision too at a young age that like I will be better off. Like when I get these shackles of expectations of youth off of me and I can go and be a free adult, like I'm going to do well. I'm going to figure this out, right? And that's probably because I had some experiences at a young age, like figuring life out in a relatively tough home life scenario uh, that I had to go through. I had to figure some things out that maybe other people didn't, right? And so I had to deal with adults in certain ways at a younger age that a lot of people don't, and realize that like, oh, it's I had to become a man faster. And what I mean by that is like had to figure out how to operate in the world and negotiate and find a way to make this work, right? So like you get a head start in a way on that regard. But yeah, I mean, I want to. There's a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a big difference between the have tos and the get tos, right? Like I always want to feel like I get to do this, and for the same reasons, like I'm confident in my ability to go and do the next thing. So like if I didn't like what I was doing right now, and we're doing fantastic, and I'm really grateful for that. I'm really grateful for clients like yourself. You work with us. There's a bunch of other people that are just amazing people to work with that I just really enjoy talking to, and I'm grateful for that. But if I stopped enjoying it tomorrow, I wouldn't hesitate to be like, hey guys, sorry, I'm shutting this thing down. I got to go a different direction. I'm confident in my ability to go and probably do this bigger, doing something else if I wanted to. That being said, I don't feel that way. I love what I do, and because that is the way I approach it, it's probably helps me love it even more. Right? That I have this freedom.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that you got to find like a way to be grateful for what it is that you're waking up and doing. And if you're not, like, it's only going to last for so long. Maybe some people have a higher pain threshold than we do in that regard,
Mhm.
but like it's only going to last so long before you hit the point where like you're like there's no longer like margin of utility here for me. Like it doesn't matter how much money they pay me, I'm miserable.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so if you can sense that's coming, it's like you might as well just start looking for the next thing. That's how I kind of view it, and I would highly recommend to people that they find some sort of way where they can align those values.
100%, man. I would agree with that. And I think like everything, I don't know, for me, I've been very fortunate where everything I've done is kind of led into the next thing, right? And like that's because I specifically go about doing the thing the way that it is in my like I guess unique genius, if you will, right? Like what I do with gyms serving this industry, I do it the way to me that feels most natural. And what's funny is like in working with my clients, the thing I hear like the most that I'm so grateful for every time I hear it, because I, coming from the world I started my entrepreneurial life in, like sales and car sales, like no one's ever going to tell you you're genuine, right? Like you're just not going to hear that in that world, even if you are, right? But in like this, what I'm doing now, I hear it all the time from people, and I'm like, I'm super grateful to hear that. It's like it's a form of reciprocity, right? Because like I do work hard and I do care a lot and I do want to help everybody, and want my clients to stay for a long time because it makes sense and it's a win-win deal. So it's kind of like a kid, right? That like my kids, I love them unconditionally. They never have to tell me I love them. They don't owe me a darn thing. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't. If they do, it's bonus, right? It's the same with my clients. If one of them were to say, if any one of them says to me, like, I really like what you do, you're a really genuine person, I'm like, man, that's so like, thank you for that, right? That's really a strong form of reciprocity for me, and it drives me to keep wanting to do it. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the number one layer of relationship is like, you know, you're delivering a service to them or you're their father and you're going to do that job well. But if you do it well enough, it's almost like that second layer of relationship kind of kicks in where they feel like you are important to them. Um, and that actually like reminds me of like this saying that I heard at a seminar not too long ago was like they were talking about different layer relationships, right? And there are those layer one relationships where it's just like transactional, right? It's like, I give Will money, Will gives me service, done. Then there's, layer two where people are actually concerned about each other to a degree, but it's still, I help out Will, Will helps out me. It's a very symbiotic relationship. And then there's the level three, which is really where you can really make a big impact, which is Will's needs are just as important as if they were my own. And that's where I think a lot of people start to make breakthroughs, is when they start running from that sort of operating system.
Yeah, no, 100%, man. That's pretty spot on. I think like just yeah, when I learned as I started going through these different mentorship and things like that, and gain that kind of guidance, some of the ones that I connected with the most um, were these guys that always like gave what felt like way more than I was paying for. I was like, I thought I was paying for this, but I ended up getting like this whole other thing, right?
Well, that's the best feeling, right? Is like when you pay something and you're maybe a little bit apprehensive and you're like, dude, I like underpaid on this.
Right. Oh yeah. Like, well, usually it came because I would sign up for some mentorship program and they'd be like, let me show you, we're going to show you how to do some lead gen stuff. Right. And there's a lot of crap out there when it comes to that world. Right. But there were a few guys I got an opportunity to work with that like, I thought I was signing up for, like, they're really practical, like in the dirts training on how to like, make a funnel better or whatever, or how to write better copy. And I got in there and they were like talking about mindset and, value and, creating value and, forms of reciprocity. And like when I learned about like I started learning about human psychology and some of this stuff, and like how different brain chemistry is triggered, and that in the conversation with a client, with a prospect, that can really warm people up to you. And obviously that stuff can be used for good or for bad reasons. There's plenty of people in the sales and marketing world that use this kind of psychology for negative reasons. For me, it was never really the case, because like what we do is pretty high value and actually has like functional, practical use for our clients. Even if they don't use anything else we give them, it does that at a very, very high level, as you know. So it's like everything else we do on top of that is just extra value, right? And that's why in our program you'll hear us talking about those things, because like we want the gym owner to go from being self-employed to being an actual business owner, right? We don't want them over here wearing a bunch of hats, filling a role on their organizational flow chart, which they don't even usually have, because they don't know what an organizational flow chart is. We want them over here. What Rich Dad Poor Dad, the book is right up there, calls the cash flow quadrant. In the bottom left, on the left side is your employed and self-employed, which are people that have jobs, and on the right side you have business owner and investor. My mission is to take as many gym owners as possible and get them over on that right side, right? Get them into that business owner category, which is defined as someone who buy or implement systems, whether they buy it or build it themselves. They implement systems and they hire people smarter and better than them to run them. That's a
Right.
business. And then an investor is someone that steps out another level, and just someone else even does that part of the systems, and they just feed cash into it. And they're just like, put $1 in, get 5 out. Put $1 in, get 5 out. That's where we need to be as business owners. And that's where we've seen the biggest transitions. The thing is, there is those two heroes' journeys, the internal and the external one, going on at the same time with the gym owner, that they need the external pieces of, like, a better funnel and a better website and better follow up and better messaging and more creative differentiation in their market and all this stuff. They do need those things, but they also themselves need to have a shift mentally with, like, letting go of some of these things that they're holding on to so tightly.
Yeah, like just leveling up that mindset.
Right. Yeah.
So, kind of, bringing things a full circle here and coming back to it is, um, as a business owner
Mhm.
and an investor, um, you feel like you've positioned yourself like well where, you can start setting up for your future. So, like over the next 5 years, where are you like aiming to be financially? Like, what are your goals for investing and being a business owner?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because that's actually, like, literally, like, as they hiked rates up, like, to the highest degree in what they say, like, 20 years, something like that, the other day.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's becoming more real, this potential opportunity here. We have a long way to go still. It's fast and it's slow at the same time, right? So,
Yeah.
if there's one thing in the past that I would try to do, is always try to time the markets, right? And it's like, and what I've learned a lot over the last couple of years about is, like, instead of trying to time the markets, like, the concept of, like, dollar cost averaging your way in, which is, instead of, trying to just throw a single dart and hit a bullseye, which is the painful part about a bottom of a recession, is, like, you can always look in hindsight and be like, yeah, that it looks easy, right? But then, like, I don't know, having, like I said, had experience in the past one, you're almost better being a little late than early. But if you want to make sure you're both, then you dollar cost average and you get
Well,
all.
yeah.
Yeah,
Every time we get a drop in like crypto or Bitcoin, like, oh, I get a text from like people, or I'll be on a thread and it's like, hey, is this the bottom of Bitcoin? Like, should I buy right here? And it's like, dude, like, if you believe in this, then it's going to be back up in the next 5 years. So it doesn't matter if you buy today or in a month. Like, as long as you're buying on the way down, it works out.
yeah. Versus, like, trying to, like, blow your load on, like, a single shot, and then it were to keep going down 40% more, which is what happened in the last recession. Is, the market really started crashing in '07. It kept crashing through 2008 down to 2009. Tons of people bought, like, on the first drops of '07. And if you look at, like, the stock market, it's a pretty good indicator of what everything did back then, including housing. Everything dove real hard, and then it kicked back up. It did what they call a dead cat bounce. It hit the bottom and bounced back up. And a lot of people, like, bought in between that when it was most volatile, and couldn't handle the swings and got themselves in, like, hot water, and either, like, got out too soon or panic sold, or yeah, and it
Got margin called.
margin called. Yeah, exactly. Versus, like, had they just started buying little by little wherever they could on whatever equities are available to them. It's harder with, like, a thing like a house, obviously, because if you don't have, a huge stash of cash to buy, like, 10 houses, how are you going to dollar cost average your way in on, like, real estate? In that situation, you
Yeah.
probably just need to wait and be a little bit late to the game, and, like, let it hit bottom and start coming back up. So for me, to answer your question, anyways, like, I'm gonna try to dollar cost average my way in on most markets, including crypto, including stocks, real estate. With that, I'm not, like, chomping at the bit with where prices are right now. If they started coming down and we started seeing some real pain, then I would probably start looking at some deals with that. I pretty much
Yeah.
set myself up for, like, weekly buys on all my platforms that are holding, the more equitable positions that I can sell. If I want to get out of quickly, I can. Like, if I want a really good deal were to come up for, a big real estate project in, like, 2 years, if I've bought a bunch of crypto and stocks in that time, it's easy to sell that stuff off and take that cash and go and buy that property. But for the meantime, until, like, anything really makes sense to do with that, I'm just gonna buy a little bit every week. And as we get closer and closer, as it gets deeper and deeper, buy, increase those, I guess, the intensity of each one, right? So right now it's kind of just starting. I don't want to get too crazy because, we don't want to big double dip thing go up and down. So I'll just kind of ease my way in. Then as we get further and further down into that trough, I'll buy more and more. But then as, bigger opportunities come across, say real estate project, or we want to start adding to our portfolio with real estate and buying some more homes, because that'd be really cool, is to essentially own, for me, I think that'd be, on my bucket list for sure, entrepreneurially, of having a portfolio of properties that cash flow right now. And right now, at the price you buy them at, there's no, unless you're a cash buyer, there's not really any cash flow to be had. What I'd like to do is ultimately use what leverage I can, and use other people's money if I can to acquire the home with a down payment, have a few of them that cash flow over and above, those, my liabilities on the property, if you will. So obviously stay liquid in regards to, if it's crypto or stocks, and, buying my way in with those. But if I need that cash, being able to pull it out quickly is nice with those types of markets. And then as things come out of that, I probably start looking, what I've been looking into recently. I just didn't want to get into it because, again, the market's really frothy, is maybe some like private equity or like investment trusts and stuff like that, where you can be a partner in on, a larger portfolio, which would be really, really cool. So it's something I've been thinking about for a while. So I'm just waiting for the market to kind of be in a position where it makes more sense to get involved with those things.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's cool when people actually have a mindset like that too, of like, what is happening on a macro cycle is like when there's fear in the market, right? There's a lot of opportunity. So you got to start to think. That's when I think people need to start looking internally of like, hey, what's some things that I've been thinking about
Yeah.
investing in, or thinking about putting some time and energy in, and then going off and trying to capitalize, because it is uh, an opportunity for growth. I remember seeing you put up a post that like when things first started kind of getting bad, you're like, hey guys, like don't think the sky is falling. Actually, 2008, 2007, like you were saying, was actually when I got really a good solid base underneath me. So I think for people my age and younger, if you've positioned yourself well, this could be a time where you can start to make your wealth.
Oh, 100%. I mean, there's really, in that same post, what I had said too is that, like, try to find the silver lining in these things. It's not even silver lining. It's really just what it is. And that, like, you know, um, there's only going to be like 4 or 5 for most people, like major recessions through all of their, like, money making years, maybe even less than that, and those are really the only opportunities that like a person has to like really get a big enough chunk of something that can go up in value enough to like jump you like levels up in the game, right? So if you were raised middle lower class or whatever, or just never really had much of anything, if you put yourself in a good enough position during these down tier periods, this is where you buy in heavy enough to create like large amounts of wealth, right? And I didn't even do that much. Like I've been, you know, you know, waiting for the next opportunity, as a lot of people are, to go even heavier this next time, right? Like I really want to, like, this next time, just really, really send it as hard as I can, because
Yeah.
I take what I've done so far, because like while I've been successful, like this day and age, like even having $1 million in the bank isn't really still that, like, that's, you can't hang it up off of that. You can't, you
Oh
know,
yeah.
that's not what you consider like, ultra wealthy. I think are people that are like net worth 10 million and beyond these days. And that used to be like a fraction of that to be considered a high net worth individual, right?
Right.
So
Well,
that's
that's
what.
one thing I noticed too, is like I like to see how people like think, and think of some of the reasons why people get to be where they are, right? And one of the things I've noticed throughout our conversation is like the progression of how you measure units of money
Mhm.
throughout your life, right? And you said at one point, you were like, well, I was making $500 a day, and I was like, oh, that's 2 car sales, right? And it's like there's that progression of like how you think about what money is worth and what's a lot of money to you. And I think that is really important, is when that starts to shift, like you're starting to shift. You're like, yeah. So at one point, $500 a day was a huge deal to you, and you're like, it's 2 car sales, and now here you are, and it's like, well, $1,000 and $1 million in the bank is nice, but that's not going to be enough to get the job done. So it's like that progression of units of money. It's definitely interesting thing.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it's this perspective shift, right? And it's like, because I don't, like, money's great and all that stuff, and like obviously it's the basis of this whole conversation, all that stuff. But like, really, I think the what everybody wants is like freedom of their time, because it's the one thing that they don't get back. And like, yeah, we want to be successful. Some people have a high drive, as I do, and those things are important. But like, I don't feel like I've I've changed only in like positive ways, and looking at these things as like most people I know that are really successful, because people have like this like false beliefs that like everybody who's rich and famous is like, or not rich and famous, but just rich or wealthy, have taken advantage of someone
Is
else to get there. Like that's like the
right.
common narrative you see with like the have nots, and the common main narrative being that like, the people that the haves have done it by way of taking advantage of other people. And it's like most people I know of all shapes, sizes, and races are like really, really good people. Like they've taken care of people. They just provide a lot of value, right? And money is attracted to people of value, right? So it's like, how do I just become a more valuable person to other people in regards to like what I can provide for them, and over deliver and get them a return on their, if they are spending money with me, because I know that they worked for this money, right? Like a, a client of mine works to raise that cash so they can give it to me, and they're doing it because they look at it as an investment. I want to spend this money with you, Will, because I would hope that I can get 3 or 5 or 10 back, and we put a system in place that saves me time, right? And so, if they're doing that, like I want to blow that out of their expectations out of the water, to where like, you're building reciprocity with like the universe or whatever, the mass of people you serve. And like the cash almost just kind of becomes like a byproduct of like you doing that, right? Like it just kind of comes effortlessly. I feel like if I just focus on doing right by my people, right, and then just like being who I am, and like working within my zone of genius, and it's like, and then so that's kind of the way I look at it, you know. And yeah, it's funny. It's like
Yeah, yeah,
have leveled up my thoughts. There was a time with I had the turf company where like I thought like I didn't want to get out of bed for less than $1,000 a day. I'm like, unless my company generates $1,000 revenue today, I don't think it's a good day, right? Um, and that's relative, and then that's gone up. And now I no longer look at it as a good or bad day. I just look at it more in regards of progress, like that value relationship and what I'm building.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's something to be said for like, whether it's your business or like your personal development or your fitness. It's like, if as long as I do something today that I know is going to set me up for a better tomorrow, then I'm happy. I'm satisfied. But if I go to bed knowing that, like, hey, in this one area of your life, like you just dropped the ball today,
Yeah,
it's real hard for me to go to bed. Like
yeah,
it will drive me up a wall. Um, so I'm real big. Like I think that's been one of the things that's helped me recently. Like is like trying to write down. I'm a big fan of Andy Frisella's Power List, so I write down like 3 things that need to get done. And even if nothing else happens in my day, if those 3 things get done, it's like, all right, I'm moving forward. I'm a body in motion.
yeah,
Um, because without those things, it is hard sometimes to figure out where you're going, or you feel like you're not making progress because maybe you didn't have $1,000 day, so you're beating yourself up.
yep. 100%. Yeah. And like I look at it now, like, we've been like crushing it this year. Like, and I say that from like the perspective of like, I kind of thought we would, but I'm like and I'm really happy that we are, but like nothing's guaranteed. Right. So like, I'm super, super happy about this and like proud of it, but I'm still kind of wearing the hat on our organizational flow chart on the sales end. Like I primarily, handle the influx of leads that come in, and we have a lot of great automation stuff in place. That's what I do, right? But the actual conversation of converting that person into a buy, or like them sitting down and going through our discovery call, I still handle that. And I even have
Yeah,
prospects come on and they're like, I'm surprised I'm even talking to you. Like, I know who you are. I watch your stuff. I thought I'd be talking to a salesman. Like, like, and I'm like, well, I probably should have you talking to a salesman, right? I'm wearing that hat. And like, we're having like 5-figure days sometimes because I'm doing that. And that's great for the first like month that we're doing that and having those days. But after like
right,
2 or 3 months of it, I'm kind of sitting here and like, I'm not really thinking about the money anymore. I'm thinking about like, man, like, this business won't continue to make this amount of money if I don't get out from underneath this position, because like I'm going to burn out here. Like
right,
there's already been days and weeks where I'm like at the end of it, I have to, come our Monday sales call with our Monday team meeting with my team. And it's my turn to like, just, do a brain dump of like the last week. Cause that's what we do on our Monday calls. I'm just like, guys, like I'm freaking, like, I'm grateful you guys are holding down the fort on the operations and fulfillment end, because I am like just throttled.
yeah, yeah,
And if I had to help you guys with any of this, like that you're responsible for right now, I I, I'd be struggling real bad, right? So like, I'm really just thinking
How
about
do
building
you find
a.
that balance? When do you decide like, all right, now is the time that I got to start replacing myself in this, or you know,
Yeah, yeah.
it's
Well,
like what's that like?
yeah, I mean, so hiring another person is an investment, right? You're investing in that person. So it's really the same logic as the markets, right? Like, I make that move when it's painful enough. Now, some business people that are like, high level, that have done this time and time again, probably have the ability to pull the trigger before they're in pain. But for me, it's always been like, okay, it's pretty painful now, and like, I'm not really enjoying this as much anymore. Like, in the moment with the person on the call, I'm loving it because I love talking to people who do what I did for years and helping them figure out their business. But like, I gotta decompress at the end of that, because it's like there's a lot. Plus, it gets very repetitious, right? Like, when you work in an industry, it's kind of the same sets of problems over and over again. So like, you're kind of trying to keep yourself excited about it, and like, you should be, but you've heard the gym owner for
Yeah, you've heard the same story a hundred
this
times.
gym owner on the road today talking about like how they're overworked and underpaid, and and it's like you're trying to stay excited about it because you do care, and all that. So it's kind of almost become like a work hard, play hard thing, which is not a bad way to handle it. I think when you're really like in the midst of a growth phase of like, okay, when you do get some time, like really blow off some steam, right? And so that's kind of been how I've been finding business. But that being said, or finding balance. That being said, like, work hard, play hard is not really sustainable for that long of a period of time. So I think it is when I start to feel the fade of that work hard, play hard balance, not really having benefit, that I'm like, okay, we got to make this move, right? But I learn every time, and I make them. And with every business, I've done the same thing. Where like, I own my gyms. I probably coached classes a little too long because I didn't want to let go. I probably held on to some of the front desk admin stuff too long because I didn't want to let go. I held on to doing sales consultations and marketing stuff too long because I didn't want to let go. But every time I did, and when I finally did, every time I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, this, I just leveled up as a business owner. Like, this feels awesome, right? So I know this
Yeah,
will feel really, really good. And I think what's important is, as you're nearing that time to do that, you start adding process to it, versus like, because for the gym, the business owner, oftentimes it's so natural to go and do that job because it's just kind of become something that you do, that for you, you forget that like bringing someone else on into that position is going to require you teach them process, because people's thinking is sometimes different from like this, from you as a gym business owner that's built this thing with a very, like, a flow to it, right? Most people
hmm
coming in, this looks like a mountain, and you're like, okay, here's how we climb the mountain, right? You have to give them those steps and teach them. So that's kind of what we're working on right now, and what I would recommend anybody else in the position is, and like, that's how you do it, and generally, you know, you probably would do it faster than maybe even I would if you're going by the books, right? If you're going by the
yeah,
books behind me that tell you about scaling, you probably let the revenue determine that, right? Like, we surpassed the revenues to which I probably should have scaled the team, uh, a long time ago, right? But it has nothing to do with
yeah,
wanting to keep that money for myself. It has nothing to do with that, because like, we need the tax benefits of hiring people anyways. So it's like, why not, right? It's just the doingness of it, right? It's like,
yeah.
just gotta.
Yeah, to actually go out and execute and find the
Yeah,
right person and then train them and then bring them along. Like you have to like that's why I asked that question is like it's not easy to figure out when it is time to make that decision.
yeah.
Just like you
Timing's never
talked about like
perfect, right?
yeah, yeah, you talked about like all right, February and March, like I set it aside that I was going to sell some of my positions and you sold it. So, um kudos to you for doing that. Was there also like maybe some outside factors that like that drove that or is it purely just like, hey, financially I made this promise to myself and I got to keep my promise?
It's that. And I think that, I think when you've invested enough, like, in your knowledge, and like, done this enough, with a reasonable level of intensity, like, to some degree, you just gotta like trust. You just gotta like look at something and be like, I think this is gonna go strong for like 2 years, because this was already getting frothy before this, and we just got a big adjustment. With going talking in hindsight about buying the dip, and then it coming back up and selling 2 years later in March. It was just, I just felt like that's based on past experiences. That's what we were going to see, and it was weird. It was almost like, yeah, there's some like logical things I can explain there, but then also there was some feeling that like, I think that
Some
this,
intuition.
some intuition, right? And it's funny is like that intuition's worked out for me enough times in the past. Like I said, we rewind the story, there's enough things that just had overlap that worked out for me that like you could call it luck, but it's not because like I made logical decisions in that period. Things just managed to present themselves to me that I think are presenting to everybody. But I don't think a lot of people know how to recognize an opportunity because like their intuition's not there.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
people are just too plugged into what I like to call the matrix,
yeah,
and they're caught up in the everyday headlines and social media buzz or whatever that they are ignoring what's being thrown in front of their face.
yeah. And if you like understand, and like I don't know, when I started investing in good mentorship and like coaching, and I started having some of those breakthroughs with some of those coaches about like learning about human psychology and all this stuff, and like there's some really good books on like mass human indoctrination and stuff like that, and like how people think. Like you read these things and you can kind of see like the laws of nature, if you will, and you're kind of like, oh, I see people doing that thing. Like so
What you got any books in that come in top of your head that you would recommend?
a
I'm
lot of
always
them
looking for
a lot
some.
of them are right behind me. I mean, shoot, man. The one I was just talking about there was, man, is it here? Sorry, I don't want there to be any dead air. I mean, shoot.
No, you're good.
Yeah. There's one. It's about like this. There's one that I really like. It's about like the school system and like mass indoctrination, but it really
Hmm.
gets into like why they do it that way and how it creates people to be like the more consumerism and stuff like that, and like forge people's beliefs and biases and things like that. It's really interesting. I'll have to maybe you can put it in the links afterwards since I'm like
Yeah,
teasing.
you have to shoot me over
Yeah,
some
that's a really good one.
after the show.
I've got so many. Usually, when I get on these things, I do think like, what are my top three books? Because I know they're going to ask. Expert Secrets by Russell Brunson is one of my favorite ones as well. He gets a lot into human psychology and like buying patterns of buying behaviors. Um,
Right.
and then a lot of the classics. Think and Grow Rich was probably the book that like changed my life. Read that book when I was like 19, and that's when it wasn't too long after that. I was like, let's go take advantage of some opportunity. And then my buddies called me up and were like, hey, you want to move west? And I was like, yeah, let's go. I was just saying yes, right. Think and Grow Rich is fantastic. That's a really good one. So
Yeah, awesome. I mean, I think those are some good recommendations. I've read Think and Grow Rich myself too. So,
yeah,
um, a lot of these books, like I think it's about just again same thing as we talked about earlier is doing the work on yourself. But sometimes these books too offer a shift in perspective, and it's just you just start to accumulate enough of these things, and before you know it, it's allowing you to see something like, hey, I've felt this feeling before.
yeah,
This market feels a little on edge. I'm gonna just, hey, I told myself I'd take some profits. It's that time.
yeah.
Um, so, um, yeah, I mean, hey, Will, it's been a pleasure having you on here. Is there anything else that you really wanted to touch on before we kind of wrap things up here?
No, man. I mean, we're heading into an interesting time with what we're looking at ahead of us. So there'll be some opportunity created by way of that. I think it pays to be patient and and try to get yourself in a good position where you can take advantage of it and get a piece of it, so that way you can jump up levels in regards to like your personal wealth. Because what I'll say is like it's not about just accumulating personal wealth for status and recognition. It's so you can go and do whatever you want with your life. You know what I mean? It's like if you don't have to worry about paying next month's bills, like you can go and pick and choose and do whatever you want. And when you go and find that thing that is like your unique genius, that matches up with your unique genius and is fully aligned with who you are, like you're going to be the best version of yourself in that market and for whatever products you provide in that market. And it's just going to spiral up, right? And you're going to put yourself in position for more things that kind of just fall in your lap, right? It's going to feel like it falls in your lap, but it's only because like you literally like swam down that river when you started this journey, and like the things that you knew were going to be there are there waiting for you, right? So yeah, I think it's an interesting time, and for a lot of like millennials, it'll be their first time dealing with something like this, and it's going to shift a lot of like the way that they look at money and wealth and investments. um, so yeah, it's interesting, and I'm excited for everybody to kind of have their experience of it for good, whether it's good or for bad. It's always whether they have a good time or a bad time during it. It's going to ultimately end up being a good thing for them because they're going to learn
Right.
either way, as long as they maintain an open mind, right?
Yeah. I mean, I happen to agree with a lot of what you've talked about today. Um, And I think there's a lot to be said for someone who's been through a market cycle like this before. And I like how, like, although you've kind of cautioned a lot of things, is like there's a lot of what we spoke about has been about um, how to be opportunistic, how to take advantage of these things, and doing so in a way that feels right for you, right? It's not just like, hey, it's not just buying the Bitcoin dip because you think it's going to make you rich and your buddy told you to do it. It's like, no, like you're investing in projects and doing things that you believe in at your core at a cellular level, which I think is also an important thing. So I just wanted to acknowledge you for that, because I think those things are much bigger than just, like you said, the personal level of profits. And it's much more forward thinking. You're going to feel better about doing those things when you look back in time. Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for sharing your story, and appreciate you coming on the Rocketcast, Will. And we would absolutely love to have you back on here sometime.
Absolutely, brother. Thanks for having me, and I'm grateful for an honor for the opportunity to tell it. It's something I've been wanting to do more of. So thank you for giving me the opportunity, and I'm super excited to see how this does for you, man. You've been a great host, and I think you're just going to keep crushing it.